The Bermuda Triangle, lost souls, and endless night. The sea was calm, too calm. But in the Bermuda Triangle, that was the first sign that something was wrong. No one who had crossed its waters had ever returned to tell the tale, until now. The flight was supposed to be routine, just another cross-country trip from Miami to Puerto Rico. Captain Dean Harrows and his crew had flown this route 100 times before. The airstrip had seemed a little too quiet that morning, but they thought nothing of it. A quick look at the radar showed nothing unusual. Then, as the plane cut through the clouds, the signal began to flicker. "That's strange," muttered the co-pilot, Marcus. He glanced at the blinking lights on the dashboard. "It's as if we're being jammed." Before Dean could respond, the lights in the cabin flickered, and the temperature plummeted, despite the air conditioning running at full force. Sweat beaded on Marcus's forehead, though he shivered uncontrollably. The unsettling quietness of the skies had turned into a heavy pressure, like the atmosphere itself was watching them. Dean tried to steady the plane, but the wind had become erratic, even though there were no storms in sight. Then, something appeared in the distance, a massive shadow under the water. It was as if the ocean itself was stretching, pulling the plane toward the unknown. "We've got to turn back," Dean said, but as he reached for the radio, static filled the cockpit. He tried to communicate with air traffic control, but there was nothing but a low hum in response. The shadow grew larger, and the plane was being pulled closer to it. Suddenly, the aircraft lurched violently, throwing both men against their seats. The lights went out completely. Silence. When the cockpit lights flickered back on, the ocean beneath them had disappeared. In its place, a fog so thick it seemed to block out everything. Dean's heart raced in his chest as he tried to make sense of the situation. "What in the world?" he whispered to himself. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. "Captain, I don't like this," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "There's something wrong here. This isn't just weather or a malfunction. We've entered something else." As they flew deeper into the fog, strange figures appeared outside the window. Shadowy shapes that seemed to stretch, twist, and move just out of sight. And then, the whispering began, faint at first, like a chorus of voices calling from far below. Dean's grip tightened on the controls. "Stay calm," he urged Marcus, but the tension was thick in the cabin. Suddenly, the figures appeared closer, forming faces with hollow eyes, gaunt and pale. Their lips moved, but no sound escaped. Dean's heart froze as he realized what he was seeing, the lost souls of those who had disappeared in this very spot over the decades. Their faces were twisted in silent screams, their eyes wide with terror. The plane lurched again, and everything went black. When Dean awoke, he found himself not in the cockpit, but lying on the cold floor of an unfamiliar room. The air smelled stale and damp, and as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he realized the room was completely enclosed, with no windows, no doors, just endless walls of wood and metal. "Where are we?" he muttered under his breath. Marcus was lying nearby, stirring. He blinked, confused. "What happened? Where's the plane? The ocean?" Dean tried to stand, but the moment he did, the walls around them groaned as if the room itself was alive. From the shadows, voices whispered, the same voices from the fog. "We shouldn't have come here." A voice murmured from the dark corner. A chill ran down Dean's spine. "What is this place?" Before Marcus could answer, the voices grew louder, more insistent. They were coming closer. The air felt heavier with every passing second. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall and skeletal, it moved with unnatural speed, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "You shouldn't have crossed the triangle," it said, its voice rasping like a dying wind. "You've entered a place where time doesn't exist, where those lost in the triangle linger forever. No one leaves. No one ever leaves." Dean's heart hammered in his chest. The figure before them was impossibly tall, its skin stretched tight over its bones, glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. Its eyes were like hollow pits, reflecting nothing but darkness, as if the very essence of the Bermuda Triangle was embedded within them. You're not real," Marcus stammered, his voice faltering as the figure took a slow, deliberate step toward them. "This has to be a nightmare, a hallucination." The figure's lips curled into a grim smile, an expression that chilled Dean to his core. "Oh, but it's real, very real. You have crossed into a place where the rules of reality no longer apply. This is where the lost souls of the Triangle reside." Marcus shook his head, backing away. "No, this can't be happening. We're not dead, are we?" The figure tilted its head slightly, as though considering the question. "Dead? In a sense, yes. You've crossed the threshold, just as the others did before you. But time here doesn't follow the same rules. You are neither truly alive, nor completely dead. You are trapped, bound to this place, where you will remain until you find a way to escape." Dean's mind raced. He remembered the eerie fog, the twisting shapes in the water, and the haunting voices. The lost souls. The whispers. His pulse quickened as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Was this really the Bermuda Triangle? Had they truly crossed into some kind of alternate dimension? "We didn't mean to come here," Dean said, his voice shaking. "We were just flying over. We didn't know." "You didn't know," the figure interrupted, its voice dripping with mock sympathy. "No one ever knows. But now that you're here, you will understand soon enough. The Triangle feeds on the curious, the daring, the explorers. It lures you in, and when you fall into its trap, there's no escape." Dean clenched his fists. "We're getting out of here. We don't belong." "You belong," the figure said, its tone darkening, "to the Triangle now. You are no different than the others. You will never escape. You will wander this place, lost, like them. Forever." Before Dean could respond, the figure's form shifted, and in an instant, it was gone, vanishing into the shadows as if it had never existed at all. But the oppressive atmosphere remained, pressing down on them. Dean turned to Marcus. "We need to find a way out. There has to be a way." Marcus nodded, his face pale. What if it's all true? What if we can't leave?" Dean gritted his teeth. "We'll find a way. We can't just give up." As they stumbled through the dark, empty corridors of the room, the whispers returned, this time louder, more insistent. The walls groaned, shifting as if the entire place was alive, watching them. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed from beneath their feet. The floor beneath them began to crack, and a deep, guttural sound filled the air, like the growl of some enormous creature lurking just out of sight. Marcus froze, fear seizing him. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Dean didn't answer. His mind was racing. They had to move, they had to keep going. But every step they took seemed to bring them deeper into the maze of endless corridors. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in on them. They were being herded, pushed toward something. Something terrible. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Dean saw it. A figure in the distance, standing in the shadows. It was another lost soul, one of the many trapped in this forsaken place. The figure was staring directly at them, its eyes wide and wild, its mouth open in a silent scream. "Help us," the figure whispered, its voice barely audible. "Get out, before it gets you." The figure's eyes burned with desperation. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished into the darkness. Dean and Marcus exchanged a look. There was no time to waste. Whatever this place was, it was consuming everything around them, and they were no exception. They needed to find a way out, or they would be lost forever, just like the others. But the path ahead was unclear. Every turn seemed to lead to more confusion, to deeper shadows, to more voices. And the growling sound below them grew louder, more ominous. "Dean," Marcus whispered, his voice low and terrified. "We can't keep running. We need answers. What is this place? What was that thing we saw?" Dean shook his head, unable to answer. His mind was spinning. They were trapped in something far bigger than they could understand. But one thing was certain, if they didn't find a way to escape soon, they would become just another part of the Triangle's endless night. And as the growling grew louder, it became clear, the Bermuda Triangle wasn't just a place. It was a living entity, feeding on the lost, drawing them into its depths, and never letting them go. The plane continued its downward spiral, the ground rushing up to meet them in a blur of black water and churning waves. Dean's heart raced, his hands desperately gripping the controls, but it was futile. There was no escaping the pull of the triangle now. The fog had returned, thicker than ever, wrapping around the plane like a shroud. Marcus's hollow eyes never left him as the world seemed to distort, bending and warping in ways that defied reason. The whispers had become a cacophony, a relentless chorus of voices, some familiar, some foreign, but all filled with the same desperation. They were trapped in the void, with no hope of salvation. And the longer they stayed, the more they would forget, until they became just another part of the Bermuda Triangle's twisted landscape. "Don't fight it," Marcus's voice echoed, distant and hollow. "It's already decided. You're a part of this now. And I never really left. None of us do." Dean's mind felt like it was unraveling. His memories began to blur, the line between reality and the Triangle's dark grip growing increasingly impossible to distinguish. The voices around him, some crying for help, others whispering secrets too horrible to hear, grew louder, suffocating him. "No!" Dean shouted, slamming his fists against the dashboard. He couldn't let this happen. He couldn't give in. But the plane kept falling, and Marcus stood there, watching him with those empty, soulless eyes, his face more skeletal than human. "You think you're different," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "You're just like the others. We're all lost here. We're all part of the Triangle now. It's the only thing that's real." Dean's breath came in short, ragged gasps. The fog outside thickened until he could barely see the end of the plane's nose. The ground was closer now, impossibly close. The water below seemed to be reaching up, as though it were alive, waiting to swallow them whole. The last thing Dean saw before everything went dark was the ocean, black and endless, and the faint, glowing outline of the island he had never seen before. It was no ordinary island. It was the heart of the Bermuda Triangle, the place where all the lost souls were drawn. And now, he was part of it. His soul would join the countless others, trapped in eternal limbo, wandering the fog-filled depths of the Triangle for all eternity. When Dean woke again, he wasn't sure how much time had passed. The sky around him was an unnatural gray, the sea below a vast, unbroken expanse of darkness. There was no land in sight, no sign of civilization, just endless water, stretching to the horizon. He was back in the cockpit of the plane, but the world outside was wrong. The ocean was too still, too quiet. The plane's instruments were dead, the lights flickering as if they, too, were fading away. But Marcus wasn't there anymore. Instead, the cockpit was filled with faces. Thousands of faces, all staring at him with lifeless eyes, their mouths moving in silent screams. They were the lost souls of the Bermuda Triangle, the ones who had disappeared over the years. Some were familiar faces, others were strangers, faces from every era, every time period, every culture. And they were all calling his name. Dean, help us. Never leave. He tried to look away, but he couldn't. Their voices were inside his head now, filling his thoughts, drowning out everything else. Their eyes bore into him, accusing him, telling him that there was no way out. That he was one of them now. That he would never leave. And in that moment, Dean understood. The Bermuda Triangle wasn't just a place, it was a force. A force that consumed everything that crossed its path. It didn't matter who you were or how you got there. Once you entered, you were part of it. Your body, your soul, everything, became a part of the Triangle's endless hunger. It devoured the curious, the lost, the daring, and kept them trapped in its grip for eternity. Dean's mind shattered. The realization was too much to bear. The thought of never escaping, of being just another face in the endless, forgotten crowd of souls, was unbearable. But there was no escape. Not anymore. The plane shuddered once more, and the faces around him began to fade. The world went black. Dean awoke again, but this time there were no faces. No plane. No fog. No sound. There was only darkness. And in that darkness, he was no longer sure where he ended and the triangle began. The voices had stopped, but the silence was deafening. It was the silence of a place where time no longer existed, where nothing moved, where nothing mattered. Dean was no longer sure if he was alive or dead. He was simply lost. Forever. The end. The Bermuda Triangle remains a mystery, an enigma that continues to draw the curious and the brave. Many have ventured into its waters, but few have returned. Some say the triangle is just a legend, a myth, others believe it holds dark, unfathomable truths. But for those who find themselves lost in its grip, there is no escape. Once you enter, the triangle keeps you. Forever.